Okay, everybody, it's 10:02, so I think we'll get rolling here. So first of all, welcome everybody. Welcome to our March webinar. My name is Mark Eberhardt, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Degreed. At Degreed, our mission is to track and measure all learning, including what people learn outside of traditional learning management systems. Today's webinar topic is BYOL, also known as Bring Your Own Learning. We're going to talk about the trend, what it means for you, and action items that you can take away from the presentation. We plan to present for about 35 minutes today and leave 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. Our presenter today is David Blake, founder and CEO of Degreed. Dave has spoken at learning and education conferences around the world and will be speaking at actually the Learning Solutions Conference this month, at the end of this month in Orlando, if you happen to be in the area. Great conference. We'll be presenting there. It's rare to meet somebody who's as passionate about learning as Dave is, and with that, I'll turn it over to Dave to get things started.
Thanks so much. It's good to have everyone with us for our second webinar of the year. We post these online following, so you can catch our webinar from last month on YouTube. Feel free to ping us for a link, and we will post this one as well. So as Mark mentioned, we will do 35 minutes and save 10 minutes for Q&A, 45 minutes in total. And we are going to be covering kind of three components of this trend of BYOL. And one is really looking at kind of the macro. Enterprise, the consumerization of enterprise is happening at large, and kind of BYOD led the way. We'll then look to really why this is empowering of the individual. And then the third is looking at how you as the professionals can kind of embrace and manage this shift. So we'll jump right in with number one, the consumerization of the enterprise. So at this point, most everyone is familiar with BYOD, which was kind of the first coined phrase that really embodied this consumerization of the enterprise. And what we mean by that is, as individuals are being increasingly empowered with options and choices, they're bringing, in this case, their own device into the organization. And so for me, I do remember the first time I was a management consultant at Oliver Wyman in Dallas, Texas. And when the iPhone got released, I remember the first time one of the partners came in, dropped his iPhone on the desk of our IT guy and said, "Make it work." And the IT guy just kind of, a deer in headlights, kind of looked up and just kind of said, And you could just tell the kind of trepidation of, what is this going to mean for me? How are we going to do this? I can't make your iPhone work, not secure, all sorts of reasons. But, as time passed, we've seen just how strong that influence has been. So this is the market cap of BlackBerry, with the highlights of when the iPhone was introduced and kind of as BYOD came into the mainstream. Now, a couple of stats just to this isn't just a reflection of technology or the pace of innovation and just something we have to do. This is something we should do and something we should want to do. These are stats on BYOD. Really, it's inevitable. But again, just because it's inevitable, we aren't stopping there. As we look to the far right, BYOD has been shown to increase employee productivity, increase employee morale, and it's good for employers. Employers with BYOD policies are deemed more attractive to recruits. So not only is this inevitable, but this is also good. And for both of those reasons, we want to look at it and embrace it. So now that chart we looked at with BlackBerry and kind of its demise against the introduction of the iPhone and the consumerization of IT devices, we'll look at some charts on how we're seeing this inflection point in learning. But what do we mean by BYOL? It's really the same way that BYOD is bringing your device into the workplace. Increasingly, our employees are bringing with them the training and learning that they individually have, but B, increasingly on the job in real time, the learning that's happening in our organizations is happening outside of our systems, self-directed by individuals, and they are consuming that, and not just for their individual well-being, but oftentimes for the success of their job, of the organization, and they're bringing that into the organization. And so we are going to look at kind of what does this mean for us. Love this quote from Jane Hart: "You will never again be able to keep up with the pace of business and provide everything that everyone needs to know." So first, it is inevitable. So BYOL, it's here to stay. Never again will you be able to. A little bit more on kind of the macro trend on learning and skills, and then we'll get into some of the benefits. But so, where has training historically come from, both for the individuals and for organizations? Historically, universities were providing more of kind of the foundational training. And as we've moved to, as the pace of innovation has quickened, as we move to kind of the requirement of real-time learning, that feast and famine model is increasingly serving us very poorly. So only 11% of business leaders and only 14% of the population at large agree that college provides the skills to succeed in the workplace. So then if the universities aren't doing it, are employers stepping up and filling the gap? So of current graduates, 80% expect that their employer will provide formal training. But of the last 2 graduating classes for which we have the data, less than half received any training from their first employer. So in a big way, employers are failing to fill that gap. And the employees, again, kind of this reflection of not only are universities not providing the skills needed to succeed in the workplace, but employees specifically believe that specialized training to be more valuable than a degree in the workplace. So kind of the conversation, who's responsible for the skills gap? Employers, historically have looked and said that the colleges are. The universities are saying, not us, it's not really our job. And the employees are saying, ultimately, I don't care, it doesn't matter, I'm going to go out and do something about it. Now, part of BYOL, has been this explosion of content. So there's the supply. There's the supply of content. The shift in the demographics are also part of what is driving this. So we are, by 2020, millennials will be half of the workforce. If we look at them specifically, less than half of millennials say that they have the skills needed for jobs that they will be holding in 3 years. And millennials say that they will benefit, they want this. So 34% say that their loyalty will increase if they had defined opportunities for career development, 31% for more opportunities to receive training, and 29% for an assigned mentor. So all kind of very strong indicators around training, around learning. So with millennials rising, with their demand and need for this real-time ongoing training, it's on the rise. And in the background, another big macro shift, which is that the L&D footprint is shrinking. So great quote by Burson here. We are actually seeing the increase in L&D by headcount, but as a ratio to the amount of employees that they're supporting, it continues to shrink. So the actual ratio or footprint is shrinking. Further, again, kind of back to Jane Hart's quotes, kind of the never again will we be able to keep pace. The impact that we are able to have through the traditional levers, both through technology and through the content and learning and training, are it's at a diminishing pace when considered the increasing pace of innovation and change that kind of surrounds us. So all in, the demand is rising. The ability for L&D to meet that demand is shrinking, and a shift has to happen. And we are closing that gap again with kind of BYOL. Historically, this sounds very much like employees' experience with their HR or training department. They need something. They go to the training department, say, my group of 20 people, we need JavaScript, Angular training, and we need this in the next couple of months. And our ability to meet that demand has been stifled. Essentially, I love this quote by Henry Ford: any customer can have a car painted any color he wants as long as it is black. And really, that's kind of what we've been saying for a long time. Skillsoft is it's Henry Ford's colored black. We have had a one-size-fits-all approach to training and development, as we purchased big libraries of content to kind of meet the needs universally across the organization. And that's the as long as it's painted black, we've got it for you. But anymore, with the amount of options that are out there, people are not only demanding for better options, but they have them at their availability. And so the same way we saw the decline in BlackBerry with the advent of the iPhone, and that shift towards BYOD and the consumerization of IT, so we are seeing it with learning. So the one-size-fits-all, the Skillsoft, it's a relic, and the explosion of content that we've seen. In this case, I've got Coursera on this slide, but not just in the MOOCs, also in the e-learning providers, Lynda and Pluralsight, in the marketplaces, Udemy and Open Sesame and Curious, in the platforms, Code Academy and Khan Academy, in the traditional players, the Tuts Plus and Safari books, in the boot camps, in Hack Reactor and Dev Bootcamp, in the hybrids, General Assembly and Skillshare. Consumers, the learners, they have the options, and they are pursuing those, and they are having their needs met by this ecosystem and their self-directed learning. So according to Jensen and Klein, it's now 2/3 of employees are meeting their needs by working around L&D. And I see this. Part of this is again the macro trends that are at play. The forces that are in play are driving this, and some of it is it's not a failure of L&D to do their job. It's that we are at a transition point. The tools and the providers that have historically serviced the space were set up to serve organizations that will look very different from what training and development organizations look like moving into the future. Historically, training and development organizations, it's a top-down, it's a command and control. We purchase at the top of the organization. We implement and roll out from the top of the organization down. Employees are told what they need to do when, and are constrained by the choices that we've made at the top of the organization. And that, again, was not because that's how necessarily training and development organizations want to operate, but that we've been historically constrained to operate that way. Purchasing takes time and is costly to get through discovery and contracting and procurement and implementation and security. We only have so many resources, so we're constrained by the amount of headcount and the amount of training we can develop or curate. The technology has been siloed. The LMSs have been, silos of data. All of these forces have constrained our ability to meet that the growing needs of our employees. And so at the moment what they're doing is they are simply going around us. So according to Mohan Kanagel, here are the 5 steps to BYOL. And this is not what it should look like, this is what it does look like. That 66% of employees that are going around the L&D department, this is what is happening. So first, decision. They feel a need, they decide that they need to go and learn something to skill up. Step 2, they go look for it from across this broad ecosystem. They self-pay for it. If I really need to learn something to be successful in my job, I will pull out my credit card and learn it. Costs are being driven closer and closer to zero. It is increasingly affordable, and I can do so. 4, I then demonstrate the value. And 5, it's a process of I have to recapture that investment I made, and I do so by demanding that I'm compensated for that value that I'm bringing to the job. And ultimately, if that value is not recognized, I look for it outside of my current organization. But I'm self-empowered to learn what I need to, when I need to, and then to recoup that, I look for recognition and to be compensated for that. The 25-75, the 20-10-70 kind of rules of learning, we did our own survey, and we'll begin to look at some of the results of that. But this is simply how many hours are people spending learning at their own direction versus how many hours are they spending directed by HR or L&D. And overwhelmingly, people are learning at their own direction. So this concludes kind of our first section, the macro forces. What are we to take away from it? Again, the inevitability. The levee has burst. This is happening. We never again will be able to control the pace of innovation and meet the needs of our organizations. And that inevitability, that burst of options and content, it's created this shift. People are taking learning into their own hands. Now to shift, as we talked about at the very beginning with BYOD, inevitability versus kind of the benefits. Not only is this inevitable, but why should we do this? What are the benefits? And love this quote from Dan Pink: "Control leads to compliance. Autonomy leads to engagement." And I think we will all be too quick to recognize that word compliance. It's been a mark on the industry for a decade. It's an industry term. We talk about our compliance learning. It is actually how we frame learning. It is part of our paradigm. And what is happening is we have long struggled then with engagement. And BYOL is in its own with its own forces kind of driving us from compliance to autonomy to engagement. And what I believe we will see is a happier, more engaged workforce as we embrace kind of BYOL. And the stats already strongly support that. So not only is it engaging, but just in its own silo. So not only do employees prefer self-directed learning to being compliance-driven learning, but you take it outside of the L&D, the training silo, and look at it across benefits or across holistically across the organization. And this really is the most important thing that employees want against all other considerations. So 43, this is kind of the same point, 2 different surveys, one is ours and one is the 2020 workplace, but kind of the same principle coming at it from 2 different angles. So 43% of employees say that supplemental training is the most important thing to their job satisfaction, the very most important thing. And we asked it differently, but we said if your employer were to spend $1,000 per month on you, which would you most prefer? And the number one thing, winning out over 401ks, transportation, food, is help me develop new skills. More than anything else, employees want to be invested in. They want to learn and they want to skill up. This is the kind of would you rather. We look at this. So first, overwhelmingly, people want that autonomy. They want to learn at their own self-direction. Now, well, what's the efficacy? And just asking it isn't truly driving to outcomes. But, as people are self-identifying which is actually most effective towards helping you be successful. And here we see about 3/4, 1/4, but still strongly, overwhelmingly, people say that their self-directed learning is actually more effective. And this was, what are people actually doing? So 2/3 of people are going outside of the L&D department. Well, what are they actually doing? Not surprising. When you need to learn something, what are you most likely to do? People are most likely to Google it, find it, read, watch, whatever it is that they find. But second behind that is they seek out courses on their own. And then lastly is, I go to HR or L&D to find the resources. Anymore, we have actually just been conditioned. The cycles are not fast enough. And this, again, I would put out that it's not a failing of desire or ability or kind of mentality or necessarily even culture, but that the cycles are so long inside of L&D for curating, for purchasing, for deployment, that our employees at this point have just been conditioned to go elsewhere. So I will speak briefly here and a little bit again later on Degreed specifically. And so, this trend of BYOL is near and dear to our hearts, and that is really because Degreed didn't start as a L&D training enterprise solution. Degreed started in 2012 as a consumer-facing learning solution. We saw in a world of this exploding content, of this growing ecosystem, we saw the opportunity and the need to manage individuals' learning. If you ask someone, tell me about your education, they will tell you where they went to college. We really only have one way to value, to recognize, to capture, to share, to communicate our learning, and that is formal degrees. And in a world where we're increasingly learning from a diversity of sources over the entirety of our lives, again, boot camps and e-learning and platforms and MOOCs and articles and videos and conferences and events and assessments, all of them are seeing explosions as we have this lifetime of increasingly high quality, increasingly structured learning. We have no way to capture it. And that is what Degreed was born to do, was to serve the individual and to be the place that they can capture all of their learning, from university to university, employer to employer, provider to provider, book to book, article to article. We are the place that individuals manage their learning. And it was in the end of 2013 that we honed in on kind of how that ecosystem of learning was beginning to affect L&D departments. And in 2014, we launched our enterprise solution. But Degreed was truly built to meet this requirement of learners, empowering them to learn what they need to, when they need to, by leveraging the entirety of the ecosystem of learning. Now, why is that and all of this important? Today's learners, they're not only asking, they're screaming for it. Again, this is inevitable, this is beneficial, and not only do they want it, they demand it. And that is, again, not just in an L&D setting, that is in people's, at organizational level, across any benefits, across all dimensions. People value learning, and they are pursuing it, and they are just doing it beyond our walls. Takeaway: empowering the employees' learning. It is the next movement in education, and those who embrace it will thrive. So third in today's webinar is, how do we manage this shift? How do we get in front of this? How do we embrace it? So you believe me, or maybe you still have your doubts, but in any case, how do we, what do we do about it? So David Grebo, previously the founder of the IBM Institute of Advanced Learning, we get about 25% or less of what we use on our jobs through formal learning, yet most of today's investments in corporate education are on the formal side. The net result is that we spend the most money on the smallest part of the learning equation. So first is spending. We are purchasing in a way that is prohibitive to embracing this, and we are spending in a very narrow, focused way. So both of those. So our purchasing again has historically forced consolidation of one or two even internal or external training efforts or libraries. Because it is timely, it's costly, and we just cannot manage infinite numbers of learning vendors. And so that's been part of it, is that structure actually forces consolidation, and we stay focused on kind of the formal, on the compliance. But how do we break our spending out of kind of that 25%, the 25% of formal training, formal learning, and how do we empower the other 75% with actual dollars? So those are two of the big questions. We will take these questions with us and kind of talk about how we address them at the end. But so the second is looking at well, what is happening in the 75%? What is the informal, and how do we empower it? So 5 kind of just quick rapid fire ideas. So at Degreed, we do weekly lunch and learns. A great idea. These can take many shapes, from actually kind of cross-training, cross-collaboration across the organization, people talking about what they actually do or an initiative that they are working on. Can also take the form of people reporting out on the course or book that they've read. Second idea, tuition reimbursement, kind of the new generation of it. Instead of just reimbursing college tuition, really being able to empower and reimburse when people go to conferences, take certificate programs, or purchase e-learning at their directive. Recognition programs, recognizing that, incredibly important. 3, personalized learning plans and setting specific learning goals for the individual or a group. 4, vet and recommend courses. So the name of the game anymore is curation. The ecosystem is out there, but that doesn't mean that employees are just surfing through it wonderfully. It is a big wide web. There is an endless amount of resources, and helping provide value through that curation is really invaluable. Kind of back to recognition, but acknowledge the results. Kind of 4 forces. What will this BYOL demand of us? So first, consumer approach to learning happens, it operates outside of the slow bureaucratic institutions. A consumer approach to learning demands a vastly simplified product. Consumer approach to learning forces innovation and fresh thinking, and a consumer approach to learning demands a clear value proposition. So those are all things that we must answer for as we embrace this BYOL. I do believe that as we abstract it to the highest level, it is that shift of top-down to bottoms-up. The L&D department has historically been command and control, and anymore it's guerrilla learning. It's happening at the bottom of our organizations, and we have to have the culture and the tools that bring line of sight, accountability, structure, and alignment to that guerrilla learning. And I thought these were 4 great points. These actually come out of Blackboard. But the second and last point on Degreed specifically. So how did we set out to solve this and kind of flip the model? And that really was the goal that we had as we launched Degreed's enterprise solution, was that guerrilla learning, the shift to BYOL, that shift is happening with or without us. And I mean that both with or without your agreement, or your, that also is with or without Degreed. It's happening. But, we wanted to look at that and say, how do we create the scaffolding, that alignment, that line of sight to make it so organizations can embrace and leverage that learning. And so what Degreed does is the same way that in 2012 we set out to be the place that helps manage all of an individual's learning, from academic, professional, and informal. Degreed is the place for organizations to manage all of their learning. So we integrate with all of your internal systems, your human capital management systems, your learning content management systems, your LMS, your SharePoint, any custom learning portals. We bring all of that together. We are already integrated with all of your content partners, and so we can pull all of that learning, both the courses and your individual employees, their learning activity, back into Degreed. And then we also give the individuals the ability to learn from across the entire web. So TED Talks, YouTube, podcasts, articles, videos, whatever it is, we also pull all of that into Degreed. So what it is now kind of a truly holistic span across the learning ecosystem. This is tailored for each individual on your team based on their role, the competencies that they're working on, your manager's direction for that individual, HR's direction for that individual. And as we talked about earlier, how we actually purchase has constrained embracing the ecosystem and the BYOL approach. So Degreed, we saw that as a part of the equation we had to solve for, and we did so with what we call FlexEd. It's the world's first flexible spending account for learning, and so we actually empower each individual to purchase the learning that they need, and to give kind of the ROI and and to be able to track all of that through the system, to give the organization the controls and the accountability they need to kind of embrace this model. Happy to talk more about Degreed, of course, directly in any kind of follow-up, but we'll leave it at that for now. So we're back to Jane Hart, who we opened with, but it will not be about designing personalized training nor managing people's learning for them, but rather supporting their own personal learning strategies. Really, the embracing of this is not, if you're thinking about it, well, how do we control, or how do we devise, a BYOL strategy? It's still not the right frame of mind. It really is about how do we empower the employees. And you've got to drive it all the way to and have that faith and that trust of they know what they need, they want to learn, and how do we empower them to do so. Takeaway on our last section here, accountability equals love. We've got to empower while still enforcing those learning outcomes. Love to help any of you in any way we can. But in conclusion, and then we'll move to Q&A. So first, I'd invite all of you. Degreed is free for individuals. Anyone can create a Degreed profile, and you can begin to manage your own personal learning. That's professional and personal, all in one place. There's smart curation. Go to Degreed and get credit for having participated in this webinar. Second, we'd invite you to save the date for April's webinar. A great quote by Burson: among all of the HR and training processes we study, the single biggest driver for business impact is the strength of an organization's learning culture. Next month, we'll be focusing on that. How do we create a learning culture that empowers individuals, that embraces kind of the new learning ecosystem? And lastly, one of our future webinars is going to focus on the different internal learning environments of organizations, small and large. And if anyone would like to participate in that, we would love to do a learning audit for you to evaluate kind of your internal learning systems, your internal learning processes, and your learning culture. And we would be using that then to report out to others in a webinar. We can do so anonymously or with your consent to use your organization's name. But if you have an interest, please contact us. And with that, we'll move to Q&A with the time we have remaining.
Great. Thanks, Dave, for a great presentation. Many of you have been asking questions throughout. If you have not yet asked a question and you'd like to, if you look at the GoToWebinar menu down towards the bottom, there's a questions and a chat section. Simply type your question in there and we'll receive it. So give me one moment here. I'm just going to peruse the questions that have been asked, and then we will start going through those. So a lot of people are asking, first off, if it will be possible to get a copy of this presentation. So the answer is yes. We will be sending out not only a recorded version of this webinar with audio and the presentation, but we will make available the presentation standalone as a PowerPoint document or a PDF. Okay, so one person asked, please say again what L&D stands for, and L&D stands for Learning and Development. Next question comes from Virginia. I would assert that part of the searching Google is self-directed learning as well. Tons of tutorials on YouTube as well. Actually, that looks more like a statement than a question, but that's very true of Virginia, so appreciate the statement. Next question comes from Bob. Is it possible to get a version of degree that allocates only 1 point per artifact? And he goes on to say that he finds the current scoring assumptions a bit restrictive, and again, he wants to know if there's a way to get a customized version of degree that allocates just 1 point per artifact rather than the very robust algorithm we currently use that scores individual pieces of content in a unique way.
So let me, Bob, thanks for the question. Set a little context for any of our listeners who aren't actually using Degreed. So in Degreed, all learning inputs are scored as a function of difficulty, duration, and quality, as well as tied to a competency profile. So when you take a course, that course has a competency profile inside of Degreed. And so both of those things happen. And what that enables us to do is to report out in a quantified, normalized way on individuals, on providers, on content. There's a lot that we can do with organizations to report out on their learning. So the question is, really, is there a way to alter that scoring or to, leave it to alter that scoring? So there isn't. It's again, it's a function of, and Bob's comment went on to kind of say what he values and what he doesn't, and formal and academic learning. But what we are working on is a system that organizations can customize. We call it right now, it's just internal, it hasn't been released, but we call it achievements. And that is the ability for organizations to set up specific accomplishments or goals or tracks. And so Degreed, the system is meant to work for across all verticals, across all industries, kind of at all levels. It is not customizable that way, but achievements will be to enable organizations to set up specific tracks and kind of manage it to their own needs.
Next question comes from Jeremy. The question is the BYOL trend more specific to certain areas of learning, for example, tech and software, and less so in other areas, for example, leadership and executive management?
Our survey was a random sample across the working population at large, and so it was not focused. Certainly a good question, and one we might take up ourselves to see if we can answer by industry. But I would say, our data was not skewed towards tech, which is an industry that kind of often leads kind of paves the way and pioneers it. So the data that you saw is at large.
Next question comes from Teresa. How do you ensure that employees actually took the training and learning that they want to get credit for?
Well, I think the gold standard, this is driving towards outcomes. Now verification and how do I actually know if they took the course? Well, that depends on by the provider and by the format of learning, and there's how do we in general and how does Degree do it? But in either case, I think, it's perhaps more interesting just that outcomes are better than inputs, but as articulated, that is not the gold standard. The gold standard is not did they or did they not take it, which is really, again, in the old paradigm of compliance. And really, we've got to drive beyond that towards, did this empower the outcome that we want? And the business outcome, the skill development outcome, and the personal learning plan, whatever it is, how do we drive to outcomes? I think one of the ways that's very exciting is how Degree does this with organizations is that because we now have quantified streams of what everyone is learning, we are able to correlate this to your business outcomes, to tie learning into your BI systems, and to correlate it with business outcomes, whatever it is. There's other ways, but leave it at that for now.
Next question comes from Mallet. What tips do you have for vetting learning partner programs?
Yeah, so Degree now has 1,200 providers of informal e-learning in our system. The ecosystem is so broad at this point. I think what we've seen is that almost in every case there is now a wealth of options on any topic. On most generic topics, there are excellent free resources. As you drive into more advanced and specific topics, you do usually need to drive towards high quality is usually in the gates of one of the paid providers. And this is answering very much in the macro, but it was asked without any specifics. One of the other things we've really seen is that as you do evaluate the ecosystem and your options, we find organizations anymore, they don't need to ever develop any type of generic training. There is no need left in the world for your organization to have a communication training program. There is such a wealth of options out there of an exceptional quality that we see organizations, as they begin to get their hands around the ecosystem, refocus their energies on internal proprietary training, which we think is great. We, as partners with our organizations, help to evaluate all of the training needs and bring back suggestions on providers. But hopefully that was helpful at large.
Next question comes from Paul. How does one ensure that the costs for self-elected learning point to an ROI for the employer?
Yeah, so across the board, all of the organizations that we work with have seen incredible ROI cost savings by embracing and empowering their individuals to use the ecosystem for all sorts of reasons. First, the amount of high-quality free content out there is incredible. You can almost always meet any, again, generic beginner or intermediate need with free content. As you get to advanced or specialized topics, it's usually, again, locked up and paid. But utilization, so the utilization of your contract, whatever it is almost always very low. It's a pay upfront, guess, utilize and try and by empowering individuals, they only ever purchase and consume what they need when they need it. And so utilization is effectively 100%. And so we've seen across the board, we're seeing cost savings by organizations who embrace the ecosystem.
So great question comes from Paul. Sorry, just jumped off screen. How do you suggest the development and creation of value for micro-credentialing and badging?
I love the topic of micro-credentialing and badging. Not exactly sure what is meant by the development of value. I think, at large, what micro-credentialing and badging struggles from is if you think of credentials as currency, badging and micro-credentialing is the permission for everyone to print their own wooden nickels. And so it's, in some ways, the trend is devaluing learning. How do you create value? I would say, in general, make sure you have a good way to recognize learning inside your own organization. And by recognize, it can be through badging or micro-credentialing, but ultimately, how do you value that learning? Making sure that when employees learn, they are recognized and there is value associated there, that they feel that value is probably what is most important. At large, what will we see from micro-credentialing over the next couple of years? Again, a topic near and dear to my heart, and maybe a webinar for another day.
So with that, out of respect for everybody's time, we went a few minutes over. I think we'll pause on the Q&A. If you asked a question that we didn't get to, we received all the questions, so we will reach out to you today after the webinar and make sure we give you thorough answers to all of your questions. A lot of great questions, so we appreciate everybody's participation there. So if you'd like to contact us, so if you'd like to learn more about Degreed, you can visit get.degreed. Dave's email is here. We have a phone number as well. You can follow us on Twitter as well. If you have additional questions, if we answered your questions and you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to answer them. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you'd like to watch the presentation again, share it with a colleague, etc., we will be sending it out later today in the form of a recorded webinar. We can also make available to you just the slides without the audio if you would like. And lastly, we do a webinar every month, so we really hope that you found value in today's webinar and enjoyed it, and we hope we'll see you again. We're going to be doing our April webinar. Will be first week of April, April 7th, and we'll be sending out invites for that in about 3 weeks. With that, I'd like to thank everyone again for attending and wish you all a great day. Thank you.